Everyone, welcome back. Last time we were taking a look at the major philosophical and historical changes of the late 19th century leading up to modernism. Today I wanted to continue on with that theme and examining some of the basic principles to modern art and why modern art starts to look differently. And so what we're going to do this week as we cover modern art is discuss how the art world goes from something that looks like Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, which is very visually realistic, focusing on telling a story, to Kandinsky's improvisation number 28, which is a movement towards abstraction. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about this change and why it happened, and so that we can have a deeper appreciation for the cultural manifestations as they present this. Some of the main objectives that I want us to know about as we take a look at Impressionism, which is the first step in this movement towards abstraction, is know the changes to the modern world and how these influenced art. And so some of those historical changes, and be able to apply them to the things that we've talked about before, to how artists are starting to envision the modern world. I want you to also know the major events that influenced Impressionism, some of the major ideas that started to have artists change the way that they represent the world around them, and understand the main values of Impressionism and how these were different from the past. And so Impressionism is one of the first avant-garde movements, which is artists coming together and having a manifesto and saying, this is what we're going to do. We're going to reshape the art world. We're going to change the aesthetics, and we're going to try to use art as a way of changing the world. And so artists believed that they were kind of quasi-prophets that could see and direct humanity to a better end. And so it's very influenced by those Victorian principles of hope and change in the future. They wanted to use art as a way to do that. Rather than politics or rather than social movements, they saw art as key because it was so important, ingrained within society as such a way to see and experience the emotions of what's going on and capture the pulse of society, that they believe that art could do this. And then apply these principles to major works of Impressionism. And so how do we see these ideas manifest within Impressionism? One thing that I want to note as we move on is that Paris is becoming the cultural center of the world. And we talked about at the very beginning of the semester how Florence became the cultural center of the world during the Renaissance time. Well, what happens is that France starts to catch up, and then it surpasses Italy and becomes the main art center of the world. And it still, for the most part, remains that to this day. New York kind of catches up in the 1940s, and we'll take a look at that a little bit later. But by and large, art is centered in Paris. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about this. And this really begins with Louis XIV, that he made a special interest to fund the arts. The society was known at the time, and particularly still in Europe, it's still this way for how good their art was. And so Louis opened the Academy for the Arts to promote painting, architecture, and sculpture. He wanted to build his culture and to challenge or rival that of Italy. So he paid countless funds to acquiring and obtaining Italian art for his artists to replicate. And we talked a little bit about this when we went through our discussion on Versailles Palace. Students won admission to the King's Academy and were sent to Italy to study for 5 years. And we talked about how they had to work from 5 in the morning until 10 at night. And so mainly what they were doing is they were copying and imitating the classical and Italian art in order to find and study what are the Italians doing, how were they able to create such beautiful art during the Renaissance, so that they can then replicate it for their king. And as they kept copying years and years, right, of this Italian art, they started saying, well, maybe we could do something different. Maybe we can add to it. And so slowly but surely, the values of the art world start to center upon Italy as it starts to fund more and more of the art world. And so they were expected, as we talked about before, to produce a masterpiece every 3 months in order to glorify the king. And a big part of the Academy of the Art and centering Paris as the hub of the art world were the French salons. Just wanted to talk a little bit about this just briefly. Salons were official annual art exhibits. And so if you were an art person, and here you kind of see an art salon or representation of an art salon at the very bottom. If you were an artist, you wanted to go to an art salon to have the art salon accept your work so that it could then be sold. And so generally there was a panel of judges who would judge how well your art performed, right? So if you're an aspiring artist, you'd submit your work to the panel, and then they would judge it so that you could then your artwork was then valued more. But mainly they were judging it based on the Renaissance and the Renaissance standards, and this is going to be one of the changes that the modern world starts to reject. But I just want to talk a little bit about how salons were so important. They gave the prize to the best works of art. They were extremely important to cultural manifestations. They were the artistic epicenters where ideas could be shared and discussed. They were a public space where people could talk about art. Something that was that might be quite foreign to us today, but it was something that was important to them. And for the most part, if you go to Europe and London and Paris, you'll still hear people talking about art. They'll talk about football, or we call it soccer in the United States. They'll still talk about those things, but they are much more interested in philosophy and culture and the arts. And so it's kind of interesting how these elements still kind of remain. They're still kind of important to them. But there was a nasty side to salons, which we're going to take a look at, and that's going to kind of lead us to Impressionism. In short, salons started to stifle innovation, and that's really where the modern artists are going to kind of take a bit of an issue. I want to take a look a little bit about Paris as the kind of this epicenter. Paris during the 19th century is what I would call a glorious contradiction. It was a symbol of both the past and the future. It was a symbol of art and culture, of extreme political changes of the 18th and 19th centuries. It was where artists such as David and Ingres became the leading voices of their art worlds. It was also where the French people rose up against their king, who was a symbol of their heritage. Paris in the 19th century had one foot in the past and one foot in the future as they were grappling with these changing modern ideals. And so it becomes this hotbed for political, literary, artistic changes, and becomes an oasis for artists to be able to see this excitement, this burgeoning new world, and be able to create that manifestation. And so this is just an overview of Paris, and pretty much Paris looks by and large a lot the same to this day. And so what you see on the left side, this is called the left bank, or this is called the Latin Quarter, because this is where the university is, where Sorbonne is. And so they call it the Latin Quarter because in the universities, people in the old days used to speak Latin there. And so they would say this is the quarter of the town, or the quarter a quarter is a French word for neighborhood. The quarter here is where people speak Latin, and so this is generally considered the artistic, or the rather the intelligent or the intellectual scene. This is where Hemingway and Fitzgerald will later come in the 1920s. There's the city here. This little island here is where the Notre Dame is, and so this is really the core of where Paris was founded. They built a church here, and then later, over the years, they tore that church down and built the Notre Dame, which is there at this time. So this is kind of the old medieval part of the city, and then the town is where most of the people, as they started to kind of urbanize and grow. This is where the people started to live. And so pretty much this is where, this is pretty much how the city looks to this day. To this day, we'll talk a little bit about the Eiffel Tower. The Eiffel Tower is over in this area here. And then over in here you have, right about here, you have the Louvre and whatnot. And then you have the Seine, which is a river that just kind of cuts in between it. But I want to talk a little bit about just this cityscape. So I want to talk about Victor Hugo, who was a writer of Romanticism, and he fell in love with Paris's medieval streets. He immortalized them in his epic work, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Maybe some of you have read that or at least watched the Disney film. In the novel, a deaf mute falls in love with a gypsy named Esmeralda. A priest also falls in love with her, and when Esmeralda refuses his advances, he frames her for murder. Esmeralda finds momentary solace in the walls of the Notre Dame, which offers her a sanctuary. At the time, there was the separation of the church and the state, and so if you were inside a cathedral, the church or the state could not come in and arrest you, and so people could often find a sanctuary within these sacred halls. However, the growing tide against Esmeralda is too great, and eventually she is executed for her false crime. Paris in 1482 is the setting for this iconic novel, and Hugo describes the Parisian streets of yesteryear with romantic flair. And I just want to take a look at a quote from this, and here's what he says. The 15th century Paris was still divided into three wholly distinct and separate towns, which I've shown you here in this medieval map, each having its own physiognomy, its own speciality, its manners, customs, privileges, and history. The city, the university, and the town. The city, which occupied the island, was the most ancient. Right, so at the very center is that island, the smallest and the mother of the other two, crowded in between them, like, may we be pardoned the comparison, like an old woman between two large and handsome maidens. The university covered the left bank of the Seine. And so as he describes this, right, this is pretty much what Paris felt like for several years. And it's what's really going to be interesting. A big difference between Italy and France is that France really starts to modernize, which Italy still has very strong traditional roots, and you can feel that there. But what's kind of cool about Paris, what's kind of cool about Italy, is they have this blending between this medieval, this Renaissance world, and also this modern world. And so there's a lot of modernization to it. The main modernization happened in the 1850s with Napoleon III tasked, very appropriately named George Eugene Haussmann. I don't know if there's anybody that could be tasked to renovate neighborhoods than Haussmann. That's very appropriate. To modernize Paris. It's a project that took 17 years to complete. The plan built 2 new railroad stations that would help with the rising population and their commute to work. It also widened the narrow Parisian streets by demolishing hundreds of old buildings. And so that's one thing that you'll notice if you ever go to Paris, is how wide their streets are. This is the Arc de Triomphe, which is mentioned in the in Les Mis, and it's kind of at the very center of this kind of the quote unquote the town, and kind of all roads lead eventually to this at some point. But you can see how wide these particular streets are, and so as a way for people to be able to move, to increase and improve traffic, to avoid traffic congestions. However, demolishing the houses at the time when people were flooding to Paris, which we talked about, the rising influx of people during the 19th century, meant that hundreds of thousands of people were going to be without homes. This is part of Paris of the 19th century. The plan was improved. It also improved sanitation and water and built new parks. Impressionists were fascinated by this rapidly changing modern world, and they're going to capture this changing Paris within their works. And one of the main changes to Paris is captured by Gustave Eiffel. Perhaps no structure showed a greater change for Paris than the Eiffel Tower. And I would compare this, if you would pardon the comparison, I would compare how Florence's cathedral was the symbol of the Renaissance. I would argue that the Eiffel Tower is going to be the symbol of the modern world. It was a direct assault on traditional aesthetics because it did not seek to adhere to classical elements of beauty. The steel structure was a symbol of modern architecture. Eiffel said once the tower was, quote, not only the art of the modern engineer, but also the century of industry and science in which we were living. And so he suggested this is the world that we live in, right? This is a reflection of the changes of this urban steel world of industry. So he suggested this is what the modern world is about. This is what architecture should look like. Eiffel started the project in June 1887 and completed it by March 1889, taking him only 22 months to create the tallest human structure in the world at the time, which reached an impressive 968 feet, which doesn't sound like a lot until you're standing at the top of the Eiffel Tower, and it feels like a whole lot. But as you can take a look here, this construction process is pretty impressive. How quickly, 22 months to create the tallest human construction in the world, at least at the time, is a pretty impressive feat. Nobody thought that he could do it when he started undertaking this. People thought, "Are you crazy? There's no way you're going to be able to create something that tall." And what's interesting about this is the previous tallest human-made structure at the time before this were the pyramids in Egypt, right? And so it was a long time since we tried to reach something that would kind of reach towards the heavens. And so some 500,000 people flooded to Paris to see this world marvel, and it averaged about 1,100 visitors each day. Today, however, it's a little bit different. It averages 6.9 million people each year, which averages about 189,041 people per day. And so if you want to do the Eiffel Tower, I would highly recommend getting there as soon as it opens. Otherwise, you're going to be in an extremely long line. Not everyone fell, however, in love with the Eiffel Tower. Alexandre Dumas, the writer of The Count of Monte Cristo, and Guy de Maupassant, who is the writer for other French short stories, complained that the structure ruined the city's medieval look. In fact, it is legend that Guy de Maupassant ate lunch at the tower each day. And so right here, you can see that this, if you're going up this, you'll go up an elevator, and you kind of have to go up sideways. It's kind of weird going up it. And then it takes you to this level here. And then there's some restaurants that you can eat at here, which is where Guy de Maupassant would eat. And then there's another elevator that takes you up to this level, right? And then you have a little bit more. I think there's like a gift shop up here. And then you go to another elevator, and then the elevator takes you all the way to the summit, right? So if you are going to the Eiffel Tower, you have to purchase the summit. Make sure you get the summit pass. And then there's 4 elevators, right? So there's a north, east, south, and west elevator that takes you all the way to the top. But he hated anyway. Getting back to the story, Guy de Maupassant hated it so much, but he would eat there every day. And so someone finally asked him, "If you hate the Eiffel Tower so much, why do you eat there every day?" And his response was, "It's the only place in Paris that I can go where I don't have to look at it," right? So he just suggested this was a complete assault on beauty and that. But what I would argue to you is that this is a symbol of modern world. Although people didn't always see this as, lovely and beautiful and romantic that we see it today. It's a demonstration of human ingenuity in the industrial age. It's a triumph of human technology. Many people said he couldn't do it, and he does it. Not only does he do it, he does it in record time. And so this is me. This picture, this is one of the many pictures I have of the Eiffel Tower. I think this one was taken in 2015, and this is my wife and I going up. We're actually standing on top of the Arc de Triomphe at night, and then they light up the Eiffel Tower every night, and sometimes they do different colors to it, different color schemes. Just to celebrate different things. I think this one was on Bastille Day. But anyway, it's a symbol of Paris now. And so it's kind of interesting how, even though it was hated at the time, people started to realize that this is really who we are. And so the industrial world starts to change aesthetics. And so just to kind of think about some of these ideas that we've been talking about, just to kind of connect some themes, I just wanted to kind of bring back some of these ideas. We talked about the population growth of the world. We talked about some of the displacement during the 19th century, and the child labor, some of the negative effects of this, the rise of prostitution. Here's a newspaper article where men are going and they're looking at the girls that are inside and so they're picking out, I guess, their favorite or whatever. Or Toulouse-Lautrec, who is a post-impressionist who takes a look at the salon at the Moulin Rouge. And so, again, these are, prostitutes coming in. But what we see here is the modern world is very different, right? So there's some very positive elements that are changing, but also there's some of this inherent ugliness. And so modern artists are tasked with this duality. How do you represent this, great, tremendous hope and change, and also some of the problems that experiences such as prostitution or alcoholism or child labor or pollution. We've taken a look at some of these major issues. And so what we see is that this city, the old medieval city that we see in Bruegel's winter landscape, where everything's kind of central and everyone's kind of can walk to it and everyone kind of knows each other, is being replaced by industrialization. And so what we're going to see is that the modern world, the modern artist is starting to represent this quite differently. And so I want you to think about, with these changes, with the context I've just given you in this lecture and the previous lectures, what do you think art is going to look like, right? What are some assumptions that you can make? And so just to give you an overview, some things to think about some of these major changes to the world and to how they see humanity and humanity's response in it. So think about how Marx and Darwin and Nietzsche kind of changed the way that humanity starts to see itself. How are modern artists going to visualize this? How is this going to change their view? One thing, just kind of to go through these really quickly, right, is the brushstroke. Renaissance artists try to conceal the brushstroke so the viewer cannot tell that it's a work of art, making it smooth, right, making it very clear. But what we're going to see with the modern artists is they're not going to just try to disguise their brushstroke, that they're going to put it out there for everyone to see. Because their suggestion is, why hide that this is a work of art? It's actually more of a lie if you're trying to conceal it as a work of art than if you just reveal what it is. It is a work of art. Why try to make it seem like anything but that, right? They're also taking a look at linear depth, this idea of one-point perspective. They're going to do something quite different than with the Renaissance, where you have all lines converging, or the orthogonal lines converging to the central axis. They're going to do something quite different than that. We'll take a look at that. They're questioning linear depth. Also, representational art. Representational art focuses on realism, right? Renaissance focuses on representational, focuses on realism. A chair should look like a chair. Modern artists question an actual object needs to be depicted in that way, right? What kind of insights, what kind of deep insights can an artist bring? Can an artist change the actual visual reality to represent more truth of an inner reality of the artist? And so they start to change that a little bit. We also see the changes to the definition of art. The Renaissance art defined art as a product that looked realistic and told a clear, coherent story. Modern art starts to question this. Does a work have to look realistic? Does it have to tell a particular story? Or can art just be art in and of itself with no preset standards, right? So they start to suggest that art can be something different. And with this, it comes with the change of the role of the artist, right? Renaissance defined artist as someone who's like a god, who has the ability to create, as a talent, right? Modern art starts to question this as well, right? Does an artist actually have to have some type of Renaissance creative talent? Or does the role of the artist, does it have to, be centered on some type of manifestation of talent? Or can the talent be in the ideas and the emotions that's evoked within the work of art, right? Does it have to be just the talent of creating something pretty or realistic, or can the actual role of the artist be creating insights or thoughts or a new perspective that you haven't thought about? So this is just a general overview. The next lecture is going to take a little bit look more deeply at Impressionism and Impressionist art and what they're seeking to do and how we see the application of these ideas with some works of art.